What is going on, guys? My name is John and welcome back to yet another video. Over the past 2 years, I've challenged nearly every generation in the mainline series to see if I could catch every new regional Pokemon within 24 hours. After making my way through the timeline, there is only one last mainline game that we haven't covered. Today we're going to find out how easy you can catch every Pokemon in Sun and Moon. Being that this is the 10th video in the series, you're probably well aware of the rules for this challenge, but if you're new, you can check out the playlist in the top right of your screen. Regardless, let's go over the simple but very challenging rules. The first rule is I had to play both copies of Pokemon Sun and Moon. With this, we'll give each game 12 hours apiece to catch the Pokemon, and our goal is to try and get under the 24-hour mark. The second rule is we have to obtain each individual Pokemon, and by the end of it, there should be a complete living dex of all the new Pokemon available in Alola. The final rule is that no glitches can be used. If you've been watching this for a while, this doesn't really apply to the newer games as much, but it's still important to note nonetheless. Before we get into the challenge, be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Roughly only 30% of the people that watch my videos are actually subscribed, so if you're not, I'd appreciate it if you did. These videos take a lot of effort to put together, and this is the best way that you can show support, and you can always unsubscribe if you change your mind down the road. With all that out of the way, let's just jump right into it. Now, if you played the Generation 7 games, the first thing that comes to your mind is cutscenes. While Ultra Sun and Moon did a really good job at trying to cut down all the initial storyline, these games are pretty heavy on the handholding, which you can obviously assume racks up a ton of crucial time that we'll need to catch them all. Unfortunately, there isn't really much that we can do with that, but thankfully the list of new Pokemon added this generation isn't anything close to something like Black and White or even Diamond and Pearl. After completing all the intro stuff, our journey begins in the Howley outskirts where we meet Professor Kukui, who brings us to Iki Town to try and help us get our first starter Pokemon. While trying to look for the Island Kahuna, we meet Lily and her Pokemon Nebby, who is being attacked by a horde of Spearow on the Plank Bridge. After being rescued by the legendary Pokemon, we head back to Iki Town to meet up with the rest of the group. Okay, I just explained like the first 15 minutes of the game in 3 sentences, so why couldn't they have done that themselves? We finally meet Hala, who is the Island Kahuna, and we're tasked with picking out the starter that we like to carry through the rest of the game. Once again, all these Pokemon evolve at the same levels, and generally you don't need to worry about typings as you're going to have a full team with the updated experience share, so this is almost entirely based on what other Pokemon you plan to add along the way. In Sun, I chose Rowlet and named it Otis after the top comment on the last Catch 'em All, and in Moon, I chose Popplio and named it Giratina. I'm completely aware that I could have put Primal in their name, but I think this is a lot more hilarious. If you want a chance to have a starter named after you, be sure to leave a comment, and I'll pick out the top comments on the next video. From here we have a battle against our new rival How, and although this is a very easy battle because we have the advantage, I think it's important to note one small thing. Unlike nearly every other Pokemon game, you don't actually have to win a large chunk of the important trainer battles to progress in the game. Generally, this game is pretty easy to get through, so I've honestly never noticed it until I started this challenge, but that can potentially save a lot of time if we intentionally lose to How. On the next day, we meet up with Professor Kukui again, and he instructs us to meet him on Route 1 to learn how to finally catch a Pokemon. Up until we head to the next event in Iki Town, all encounters have a 100% catch rate, so it's important that we take care of that so we don't waste any of the limited Pokeballs that we're given. In Sun, I caught Yungoos, and in Moon, I caught Pikipek and Grubbin. Back in Iki Town, we have another battle against our rival, which is where I found out about the losing strategy because I got paralyzed for 5 turns, and we end the second day celebrating at the festival. On the final day of the intro storyline, we meet with Kukui and Lily at the lab, and he gives us the Rotom Dex and directs us to the trainer school to work on our skills before taking on the first trial. After clearing through the students and the teacher, we finally completed the beginner's task and can finally move a little bit more freely through the story. I know it may not seem like much because I didn't talk about it a lot, but if you play this game, you know that I basically just cut out all of the filler information. Once we reach Howley City, we're shown some of the buildings before heading south to the docks. Here we meet with Alima, who is the captain of the first trial. We also have a quick introduction with Team Skull before having to take him on to prove we're strong enough to attempt the trial. This battle isn't all too difficult, but since we really haven't done any grinding up until this point, your best chance is to use X items to take down a Smeargle. After this battle, we're free to head north to Route 2, and if we follow the path all the way to the top, we can enter Verdant Cavern to participate in the first trial. Now, no matter which starter you chose for this battle, you're going to have a pretty easy time, but rather than repeat this info for every trial, the best option is to use X items on the totem to ensure that you can be at an even playing field with all the stat boosts that it gets when it comes onto the field. In Sun, we had to face a totem Gumshoes, while in Moon, you had to take on an Alolan Raticate. Both games don't really have an issue because they aren't very strong Pokemon, but since Sun had a little trouble with the Illimate earlier, let's focus on Moon for the time being. After defeating the totem, Kukui opens the gates to Route 3, which basically opens up the entire first island for us. At the end of Route 3 is the Melee Meadow, where we meet Lily, and Cosmog is run off to the other side of the meadow. As we're making our way through the flowers, we can catch Oricorio and Cutiefly before returning to the entrance. Right after this, we have our final battle with How for the time being, and we're told that we're going to have to head back to Iki Town to challenge the Island Kahuna before progressing to the next island. In a way, these battles are essentially the gym leaders of each island, so they're arguably the most difficult battles that we'll have to face. Hala's team consists of fighting-type Pokemon, with his strongest being his Kerbrawler. While Popplio couldn't take it down by itself, the rest of the team was able to handle it pretty well and secure the victory. After this battle, Popplio evolved into Brionne, bringing the total to 8 Pokemon. After this event, the whole gang meets up at the docks in Howley City, and we take a cruise over to Akala Island to continue our challenge. In Hiahia City, we meet trial captains Olivia and Mallow, and head north to Route 4 to progress to the next trial. Here we can catch Mudbray, but I also catch another Grubbin because I spent way longer than I'd like to admit getting the first one. Right before we enter the city, I managed to encounter a big berry pile, which if we interact with this, we can also catch Kerbrawler. Not only will this help with the coverage down the road, but this is a pretty uncommon Pokemon to encounter, which saves a ton of time having to hunt around each berry tree to try and find one. At the entrance to Paniola Town, we lose again to How and head past the ranch to Route 5. Here we both meet Gladion and defeat him before approaching Brooklet Hill, which is the location of the next trial. The water trial is probably the shortest trial in the entire game, but it can still be very tough if you don't plan ahead to take it down. Now, although normally you're not able to catch Pokemon during a trial, the trial doesn't start until you reach the bottom of the hill, so I was able to catch Dewpider halfway through, bringing the total to 11 Pokemon. The totem for this trial is Wishy-Washy, and with a few X specials I was able to scald it down to obtain the Z Crystal. Now that we've made some progress, what's Sun up to? Believe it or not, Sun is actually ahead. Like, much farther ahead. Because we have a Grass-type starter, Sun was done with the trial before Moon even finished fighting Gladion. I will note though that the next trial is much more difficult for our team, so we'll probably even out a lot better when the time comes to do that. During all this, I was able to catch 2 Fomantis on Route 5, before heading to Route 6 to complete some more story events. Here we meet Hapu and take on more of the Team Skull before going to the Royal Avenue to participate in the Battle Royale. After beating How, Gladion, and the mysterious man in the mask, we're free to head north to the next trial. Because I chose Rowlet for this game, I knew that since this next trial is based around fire types, I had basically no way to come even close to winning this. To make it a lot easier, I took the ferry back to Melee Island and made my way to the sea below Howley City. If you surf around for a bit, we can find Corsola, but we're going to use a new method introduced in Generation 7 to get a completely different Pokemon. In this game, Pokemon can do what's called an SOS, where they call for another Pokemon to help them in battle. Now, most of the time this results in the same Pokemon appearing, but in some encounters you can find a completely different Pokemon. Marini is only available through SOS encounters for this game, and they're actually really rare to find, so we're probably going to be here for... Oh. Well, that was fast. I ended up finding one after only 3 encounters, and I normally don't record audio for these types of challenges, but I promise you that I yelled a lot because I imagine this is going to take at least 20 minutes to find. After a couple balls, we're able to add Marini to the team. From here we can head back to the second island and venture through the well of Volcano Park to reach the fire trial. The totem for this one is Salazzle, and although we do have a counter, it's almost impossible to complete this without using X items. Even if you spend time grinding up Marini a few levels, you can't handle battling 2 Pokemon at once without having any stat boosts. This one took a few tries, so let's check on Moon until that's done. Because we've had the advantage of a water starter, we're able to breeze through Kabu's trial and head north to Route 8. Before we head there, I forgot to grab a Wishy-Washy during the water trial, so I spent a little time fishing outside the volcano before making our way up. At the entrance to the route, we meet Colress and talk to him about Zygarde cells, and then we're free to roam about the area. Here we can catch Trumbeak and Salandit, which brings us to a very unique challenge. While we can find a Salandit relatively easily, we're going to need to find a female Salandit in order for it to evolve. The catch is that this Pokemon has a 11.9% chance to be female, which means that nearly every single one that you find is not going to be the one that you're looking for. After spending a ton of time randomly hunting them in the grass, I resorted to SOS chaining them until one appeared. If you're a frequent viewer of my streams, you know that my luck isn't exactly very good, and this was definitely no different. If I counted right, I believe I encountered 23 Salandit before one of them was female. The fact that it's basically a 1 in 9 chance is pretty irritating, and overall this took me about 25 minutes to find. Not too great. But thankfully that's arguably the hardest encounter that we had to grab in this game. Now that we've got that situated, let's take on another trial. Inside the lush jungle we can meet up with Mallow and begin the grass trial. This requires us to grab a few ingredients to make a meal to attract the totem for this trial, Lurantis. This totem is actually pretty difficult considering that it can heal itself with synthesis, but thankfully Salandit does a great job at chipping away at its health before it sends out an SOS partner. This one still took a few tries, but overall it didn't take too much effort to get the Z Crystal for this area. Now that we're done with this, we can catch some more important Pokemon within the lush jungle. Here we can catch 3 Bounsweet and Oranguru, bringing the total to 18 Pokemon. Once again, I know that we haven't caught a ton of Pokemon so far, but just keep in mind that there are a ton of evolutions that will be happening soon. As we're making our way to the next objective, let's just check and see what Sun is up to. After defeating the fire trial, we went to Route 8 to catch Stuffle, as well as take on the same trial. Because we were at a little bit more of a disadvantage, this did take a little bit longer, but we actually finished about 5 minutes before Moon, but that's basically only because of the Salandit hunt. After the trial, we can catch Passimian and Comfey, as well as the static Wimpod that's available right outside the Pokemon Center. From here, we're told to meet Professor Kukui and the gang at the research lab in Hiahia City, and there we meet his wife, Professor Burnett, and learn about the Ultra Beasts. After watching the sky give birth, we meet Olivia in the Diglett's tunnel, as well as meet some of the members of the Aether Paradise to learn about their level of recycling or something. After a few unnecessary events in Coney City, we can head east and meet the branch chief of the Aether Foundation, and defend them from some Team Skull grunts. Shortly after, we meet the Team Skull admin Plumeria, and challenge her to a battle before reaching the Ruins of Life. Here we meet Olivia again, and we find out that she's the kahuna of the island, which means that we're going to have to fight her in order to challenge the next island. Thankfully, this is probably the easiest of the 4, and both starters completely counter her team, so this is a nice break from having to deal with some of the more challenging trials. After this match, we're given the Z Crystal, and we're told that we can finally head to the eastern side of the island to meet the Aether guy at the Hana Resort. Before we do that, we're now able to go to the beach to catch 2 Sandygast, as well as Pukumuku in the water. This brings the total to 24 Pokemon. Inside the Hana Resort, we're reintroduced to Faba, and are offered to visit the Aether Paradise with the whole group. On a quick side note, does anyone else get a huge Fallout 4 vibe from this location? I mean, seriously, it looks almost exactly like the Institute. Coincidence? I think not. In the conservation area, we meet Luzamine, who is the founder of the Aether Foundation. After Hao hits on a 40-year-old woman, a portal appears and... ugh. After running away from this flying squid, we decide to get out as soon as we can, and head straight for Ula Ula Island to find Professor Kukui. Once we reach Mali City, we throw another battle against Hao before heading into the Mali Garden. Inside, we find Kukui and explain to him that we encountered an Ultra Beast, and he tells us that we should head to the next trial on top of Mount Hakulani. Before we do that, I just want to note this one thing because I'm sure that a ton of people that play this missed this info when they played themselves. Earlier when we met Faba at the Hana Resort, Kukui said that he couldn't go because he had business to take care of. The man literally just went to get ice cream. Why is nobody mad at him? During all of this, Bounsweet evolved into Steenie during the Plumeria battle, and we ended up catching Araquanid within the Mali Garden before following the same path. After taking the shuttle to the top of the mountain, we can head to the grass to catch Minior, and Ditto for later breeding. At the entrance to the observatory, we meet Molayne and battle him before attempting the next trial. Inside, we meet Sophocles and begin the electric trial through answering multiple choice questions. The totem for this is Vikavolt, and although Brionne is weak to this, X items make this pretty easy to take down. Although I will admit that this did take quite a few tries because of some critical hits. After the battle, Molayne gives us a mask that definitely doesn't meet 2020 health code, and we're told to give it to Kukui. Wait a second, wasn't he just here? Then where could... You've got to be kidding me. As I'm about to lose my mind, we meet Team Skull again, as well as Guzma, who happens to be the leader of the team. After defeating him, we're told to head south to Route 11 to make our way to the next trial. On this route, we can catch Kamala before meeting Hapu at the entrance to Route 12. She gives us the ride pager from Mudsdale so we can cross over the rough terrain, which allows us to also reach some important locations later on. Before we head to the next town, it's important to stop at Blush Mountain to catch 2 Chargebug, as they're a pretty decent percentage encounter here. West of here, we meet with Hao and Gladion, who tells us that we should meet at the Aether House to catch up with Lily. Before we do that, if we fish in the special spots in the water on Route 13, we can catch Bruxish, bringing the total to 29 Pokemon. Inside the Aether House, we meet with her and Acerola, and fight off some more Team Skull grunts before being guided to the next trial. This one takes place at the Thrifty Megamart, where I get to show off my poor reflexes and fight a totem Mimikyu at the end. For the most part, this isn't too difficult because SOS Pokemon are too strong, so after a couple attempts, I was able to get the Ghostium Z. After the trial, we can head inside and hunt down a Mimikyu of our own, and after capturing it, Steenie, who I also forgot to count, evolved into Serena as well. Believe it or not, Sun is still keeping up and is literally a minute ahead of the other game, which is pretty impressive if you watched any of the previous catch-em-alls, considering that one game usually takes the lead after a few badges. During Moon's recap, we got a Gumshoes on Route 10, 2 Morlull on Route 11, Turtonator and Togedemaru at the Blush Mountain, and evolved Stuffle to Beware before approaching the Aether House. We found out that Team Skull came back and stole a Yungoos of all Pokemon and took it to their hideout in Po Town. After defeating Plumeria again, we can head west and have a very random interaction with Grimsley from Black and White, only to never see him again in the story, and we can ride our new Sharpedo through the waters. Moving forward a bit, we reach Po Town and are introduced to Nanu, who lets us into the area to hunt down Guzma. After the first battle, Dartrix evolved into Decidueye, but since I literally never mentioned that Rowlet evolved, we're going to count both of them even though I do have to breed one later. After skipping the entire mansion, we confront Guzma and defeat him to take back the Yungoos. We head back to the Aether House and return the lost Pokemon, and we find out that Lily and Cosmog were taken by Plumeria to the Aether Paradise. Before we chase after her, Gladion fights us to prove our strength, and we're told to meet at the docks in Mali City to take a boat there. Once we arrive, Nanu shows up and tells us that he's the island kahuna, which means that we're going to have to fight him in order to challenge the final island. After taking care of that, we head to the Aether Paradise to rescue Lily. At the entrance we meet Faba again. We're extremely surprised that he's actually a bad guy, and we have to defeat him in order to get access to the laboratory. After cleaning through all the Aether employees, we find out that Cosmog is believed to be an Ultra Beast, or at least has connections to whatever the flying jellyfish from earlier came from. After heading back up, we have to challenge Faba and his crew again, and we're given the key to head to the mansion outside. At the entrance to the building, Guzma challenges us to a battle that was admittedly pretty challenging before letting us pass to keep searching. Inside, we find Lily and Luzamine, and we teleport after her to stop her from hurting Cosmog. In a frozen museum, we find out that Gladion, Lily, and Luzamine are all a family, as well as her plan to use Cosmog's power to connect to the other dimension. After unleashing the Ultra Beasts all over the Alola region, we challenge her to a battle before she escapes with Guzma to the next dimension. With no way to enter the dimension ourselves, we're tasked with finding Hapu on Pony Island to get more info as to what we should do. At this point, Moon has taken a pretty solid lead, but it's important to note that there were many evolutions that happened during this time. Trumbeak evolved into Toucanon, Mudbraid and Mudsdale, Brionne to Primarina, and Salandit to Salazzle. After collecting the flute from Gladion and greeting some of the people of the Seafolk village, we can head north to the wilds to find Hapu. Before we do that, if we fish within the village, we can encounter Delmise, which brings us to over half of the Alolan Pokedex. At the Ancient Pony Path, we find Hapu, and she tells us that she's heading to the Ruins of Hope to find out more information. Inside the ruins, Hapu is chosen to be the next kahuna of Pony Island, and we're tasked to battle her in the canyon before attempting to summon the legendary Pokemon. Before we do that, we talk to the old man at the village, who takes us to Executor Island to get the Moon Flute. With both flutes in hand, we make our way to the canyon before having to take down a ton of Team Skull grunts, as well as talk to Plumeria, who gives us a Z Crystal for the trouble. Now that we can access the vast Pony Canyon, there is one overdue thing that we can finally do. If we level up our Chargebug while we're there, it will evolve into Vikavolt. I'm not sure why they chose to make this possible only at the end of the game, but believe it or not, there is a worse Pokemon. The final kahuna battle against Hapu wasn't all too difficult because of the amount of coverage that my team had. However, there were some concerning Pokemon like Flygon that I didn't really know how to manage properly. After defeating her, we're free to make our way through the canyon to the final trial. In a weird way, this is basically the victory road of the game, even though we don't have all of the badges in the game, but with the amount of opponents that you have to face, it's the closest thing to it. As I'm clearing out the trainers, I noticed one strange thing during battle as I was switching Pokemon, and when I checked my summary, I found out that I actually got Poké-Wrist at some point through the run. I actually first noticed this during the battle with Luzamine, but when I checked, I guess I looked in the wrong place and didn't see it on my Pokemon, or it just hadn't spread to the Pokemon I checked in the moment. But if you're unaware, this has a 1 in 21,845 chance of happening, which is nearly 6 times as rare as finding a shiny in this generation. In general, this doesn't have much of an effect on my speediness through the game, especially this far into the story, but it's still super cool to finally have something like this happen during a run. At the end of the canyon is a small clearing for the trial site, which is the final trial available in the game. This is arguably the most straightforward one, as you only have to fight technically 3 Pokemon, including the Totem, who is Kommo-o. Thankfully, because Primarina is a fairy type, we basically wall this trial and completely destroy it to finish the Alola challenge. At the end of the trial site is the Altar of the Moon. At the top, we meet with Lily and magically know how to play the flute now, and transferring Cosmog into the legendary Pokemon Lunala. With its help, we're carried through the warp into Ultra Space to confront Guzma and Luzamine. We find out that Guzma really got tired of being here and wants to return, but Luzamine has collected one of the Ultra Beasts and wants to stay to control this realm herself. After Lily yells at her to stop what she's doing, Luzamine does the very questionable and merges with the Ultra Beast to become a Pokemon? A Pokemon person? I don't know, it's just weird, I guess. I accidentally forgot to bring healing items to this battle, but thankfully my team was super diverse and had hard counters for pretty much everything on our team. Out of all the Pokemon, Clefable is honestly the hardest to deal with because it's such a wall with all the boosts, but once you take that down, it's pretty much smooth sailing. After defeating her, the Ultra Beast flees and Luzamine is nice again to end the Aether storyline. Now that we've taken care of that, there's really only one more thing that we have to do. Before we do that, Lily has a talk with Lunala and says that she wants us to catch Nebby and bring it with us on our journey. Just like most legendaries in the more recent generations, they all have a boosted catch rate, which makes this a very easy Pokemon to catch. With literally a single quick ball, we can add Lunala to the team, which will come in super handy for the rest of the challenge. After following Nanu to the Tapu village, we're free to climb Mount Lanakila and make our way to the Pokemon League. At the lift, we have one more battle with Gladion, and we can then make our very quick trip to the top. Within the Ice Cave portion of the mountain, we can catch Drampa, who is the last Pokemon that will add to the total before the end of the game. At the top of Mount Lanakila, we have one last battle against Hau, who apparently gets to decide who will take on the Pokemon League depending on the winner. I believe that this is literally the only How battle in the entire game that you're required to win, which means that I've successfully beat How one single time in this version. The only thing left to do is take on the Alola League. Per usual, there isn't really much to say about this aside from the general. It was very easy because we had a legendary carry most of the battles, and because we have a full team, we have coverage for nearly everything. But I will say this is probably one of the more unique leagues as we had to deal with Z moves in every battle, but with some luck and X items, I was able to take down Hala, Olivia, Acerola, and Kahili before reaching the champion. Because there hasn't been a champion in Alola yet, we're technically the winner of the Pokemon League. Kukui comes up to congratulate us, but we find out that in order to become champion, we have to take him on to confirm that we're the best in the region. Although I said this was a pretty easy league, this battle was much more difficult than the others. The only reason was really because I was low on money for potions and revives, but this did take a couple of tries before I finally became the champion of the Alola region. Now that we've taken care of all of that, the only thing left is the postgame. Before we do that, let's just check everything that happened with Sun. During Moon's destruction of the Alola region, Sun did a pretty decent job trying to follow along, but the teams I made were pretty lopsided in hindsight, so this game struggled a little bit more with the big battles in the story. While we made our way through the endgame, we evolved Fomantis to Lurantis, Marini to Toxapex, Sandygast to Palisand, as well as Ketchjang Mo-O, who we then evolved into Hakamo-O and Como-O. We also obviously caught Solgaleo after defeating Luzamine in the Ultra Space. At the base of Mount Lanakila, Kerbrawler evolved into Kerbominable, which brings a total to 55 Pokemon before the postgame. Overall, the league was a tad bit harder to get through, but I was actually pretty impressed as to how well my team was able to handle them, especially Kahili's flying team. After cleaning through all of them, we've successfully become Alola's first champion twice, and we can start working on the big events in the postgame. Or so you'd think. It is now time to go on a little Johnstone patent pending rant. Now, normally in the Pokemon games, once you defeat the champion of the region, the game saves and then rolls the credits. Actually, scratch that. That happens in basically every game I've ever played. In this game, however, they decided to switch it up a bit. Once you defeat Kukui, everyone heads to Iki Town to celebrate your victory, and the game ends with some fireworks as well as an encounter with Tapu Koko at the ruins at the beginning of the game. I ended up using my Master Ball because there are multiple Pokemon with very low catch rates, so I decided to just spend it now and worry about the others in the postgame. Well, this doesn't take too long to do, literally everything else does. The end story dialogue is nearly 30 minutes long, and guess what? It counts towards your in-game time. Now you're probably thinking, well, John, you can just shut off the game and you can skip all of that. And while normally that would work, they decided to make it so the game saves your progress after the credits roll. This means that no matter what you do, you have to spend the next 30 minutes spamming A, and sometimes B, even though you basically have no control over your character during this entire time. And back on the whole credits thing, if you thought this was long, the credits also take forever. You can't speed up, you can't skip, you just have to sit there and watch. No joke, during the entire time the credits ran, I left, cooked lunch in my kitchen, cleaned up, came back, and the credits were still rolling. So if you ever play this game, you can leisurely make a BLT during the credits without any hassle. And yes, there will be a BLT tutorial on the channel in the coming weeks. Okay, now that I've complained for a few minutes, let's check out all the stuff that we have to do in the postgame. Starting with Pokemon Sun, I immediately flew to Mount Hokalani to catch Ditto, and I used it to breed a whole bunch of Pokemon that are a little too inconvenient to catch on their own. Because we're only playing 2 games, I also traded Litten from another game to make sure we could actually complete the Pokedex. With this, I was able to breed another 2 Litten, 2 Rowlet, Stuffle, Marini, Kerbrawler, Jangmo-O, and Wimpod. There are a lot of low percentage encounters in this game. Now that we've completed that, we can work on the postgame. If we head to the motel on Route 8, we can meet Annabelle and everyone's least favorite character, Looker. Once we prove our strength to them, we're tasked with catching all the Ultra Beasts that Luzamine released all over the Alola region. For the most part, this isn't really challenging, but more so tedious with the amount of island hopping that you have to do the entire postgame. Depending on which Ultra Beast you have to go for, there are a specific amount that you have to grab, which may sound annoying, but you're given enough Beast Balls to catch them all in like 1 or 2 throws, so it's really not too bad. I will note that the most annoying part is actually having to fight a new trainer every time you jump from island to island. A lot of these battles feel very forced and unnecessary, and they really don't contribute anything to the actual story of the game. Because these battles are quite a bit more difficult than the champion, these take about 20 minutes of your time, which is a lot of filler that you have to grind through. During this whole process, we were able to catch Nihilego, Buzzwole, and Kartana. There is more to the storyline, but I figured that it would be best to save all of this for Moon to balance out the games a little bit better. Now that we've taken care of that, we can head through the puzzle in the Hyena Desert and reach the Ruins of Abundance. After completing the simple puzzle, we can catch Tapu Bulu, who is relatively easy to capture if you come with enough Dust Balls. After this, we can head into Aether Paradise, and if we go into the Conservatory, we can meet with Gladion, and he offers to give us a type null of our own to bring around the region. This is arguably the most annoying Pokemon to evolve in this game, but once again, we're going to save this for Moon because we have a long list of evolutions to take care of. The final big task we have to do requires us to visit the Altar of the Sun. If we head there during the nighttime, we can enter a portal to the alternate dimension. If we fly all the way back to the Po Town area, we can head into the Lake of the Moon. Upon arriving, Solgaleo meets Lunala, and I guess they have a baby or something, and then Cosmog appears. We're free to claim this Pokemon, which finishes up all the post-game tasks for this game. Before we get into grinding, I think it's important to go over one bonus Pokemon that's available in the game. If you boot up the QR scanner that you avoided using this entire playthrough, you can scan a QR code that allows you to redeem a mythical Pokemon. If you head to Halloween City and talk to this man, he'll give you a Magearna. Now, normally I don't consider including mythical Pokemon because they're very inconsistent in the games, but this is available to anyone who beats the Gen 7 games. Does this barely make it a mythical? Absolutely. But at least they have the Pokeball Magearna now, which is actually rare, so at least we can consider that one a mythical. While we're working on the grinding, let's check out what Moon has to take care of. In Pokemon Moon, I immediately went back to Route 1 to catch Pikipek and Grubbin because I evolved them during the story, and I flew back to the Aether Paradise to grab the second type null that we're going to evolve. Through breeding, I was able to get 2 more Popplio, which takes care of almost all the small tasks in the game. Without getting too repetitive with the Looker post-game, I was able to catch Pheromosa, Xurkitree, and Celesteela before having to work on the later portion that Sun didn't have to complete. Because the final Ultra Beast is located in the Resolution Cave, I was able to stop and catch Rabombi in the Pony Meadows before heading inside. After making it to the deepest section of the cave, we can encounter Guzzlord, bringing the total to 69 Pokemon. Nice. Although the story has been completed, the actual last Pokemon is kind of a secret bonus if you hunt around enough. If we head to 10 Carrot Hill, we're able to catch Rockruff, but if you search a little bit more, we can also catch Necrozma. This is probably the most annoying Pokemon to catch in the game solely because of its level, but thankfully this one only took a couple of minutes to add to the team. At this point, I kind of realized that I completely forgot to grab Lycanroc while I was heading through the vast Pony Canyon, so I went back to quickly grab that one as well. In the same fashion as Sun, I went to the Lake of the Sun to grab another Cosmog, as well as catch the final 2 Tapus in the game. After more Dust Balls than I'd like to admit, we can add Tapu Fini and Tapu Lele to the total. Now it's time to evolve all the remaining Pokemon. After quite a lot of grinding, we were able to evolve our catches to get Rowlet to Dartrix, Tulitten to Torracat, Torracat to Incineroar, Morlul to Shiinotic, Jangmo-o to Hakamo-o, Wimpod to Golisopod, and Cosmog into Cosmoem. This brings a total to 79 Pokemon. And in Pokemon Moon, I was able to evolve another Bounsweet to Steenie, Popplio to Brionne, and Type Null into Savali. This brings a total to 80 Pokemon, and all the regional Pokemon available in Pokemon Sun and Moon. And with that, we've successfully caught every Alola Pokemon in Pokemon Sun and Moon. But how'd I do? So let's review. If you couldn't tell by the hints I was giving about the post-champion story as well as the post-game unnecessary battles, my times weren't as great as I initially imagined. In Pokemon Sun, I finished with a time of 14 hours and 18 minutes, and in Pokemon Moon, I finished with a time of 15 hours and 22 minutes. In total, this brings the time to 29 hours and 40 minutes, which is quite a lot more over than the 24 hours that I planned. To be fair, if you play this game, you'll completely understand this game is not meant to be played very quickly. It's the most movie-esque Pokemon game as the day of this video goes up, and I can confidently say if the first hour of the game and the post-game wasn't loaded with cutscenes, I could have just barely finished this around the 24-hour mark. One funny thing to note is that I also failed the Black and White Catch-em-all, and that was because there were too many Pokemon with only a little bit of story, while this game didn't have many Pokemon, but the story is absurdly long. Just to give a little more context, the current world record is 5 hours long, and it's a really good run. So after giving it a couple attempts, I think this is probably the best that I can possibly do. I think it's also important to note that there is one Pokemon that I did miss. Marshado was available in the game's code as the other mythical Pokemon, but this was only available in these games for 2 weeks in October of 2017. Just like the other Catch-em-alls, there isn't a way to get this mythical legitimately in the games anymore, so that's the only Pokemon that we can't grab for this challenge. Overall, although I did fail this challenge, I feel like out of any of the Catch-em-alls, I feel like you'll be the most understanding with these games because of how long they are. But now that we've finished every mainline game at this point, what's next? I planned on doing the remakes next, however, I've really neglected the GameCube games a ton, and I think that those would be a super interesting Catch-em-all, even though they'd only be one game at a time. Because I really want to get your opinion on this one, if you check the community tab on my channel, there will be a poll that lets you decide on which of the series of the Catch-em-all will be uploaded next on the channel. If you choose the remakes, we'll go in order with Fire Red and Leaf Green, but if you want the GameCube games, we'll go for Colosseum first. As always, I really appreciate you taking the time to make it this far in the video, and if you're interested in taking on the challenge for yourselves, I've included some links in the description to help you become the best of the best. One last thing is if we could hit 20,000 likes on this video, I'd really appreciate it. No joke, this is one of the most frustrating Catch-em-alls to date, so it really helps the channel if you can like and leave a comment with what you enjoyed or disliked about the video. Other than that, that's all there is to say about catching every Pokemon in Pokemon Sun and Moon. And that's gonna do it for today's video. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing, as I'll be making more content like this very soon. If you have any other suggestions for videos that you'd like to see, leave a comment below. Follow me on Twitter to keep updated with new videos as they come out. If you're interested in watching me take on challenges live, I've been streaming a lot over my Twitch account, as well as upload highlights on my Johnstone live channel that you can find in the description. Other than that, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.